Intentions YouTube channel. And we also have hardintentions.com, our website, where you can get beanies, hats, shirts, all that kind of stuff. And some of my artwork, prints, and maybe some original art if you'd like. Check us out. Well, anyways, I got laid off for a while from my job. I was just thinking about a lot of the stuff I saw down there. And a lot of the stuff that I see down there is mostly like drug-related stuff, like a lot of homeless people. People are calling refugees from big tech, and it's really not the case. People are homeless out there. Most of them, like 90% of them, are they're on drugs. They have a drug problem, and a lot of it's heroin, a lot of it's speed and crack, and it kind of led me to reflect on my own drug use and my history with drugs and where I'm at now, and a lot of the people that I know that are in recovery and who are clean, and some guys who are still using. I started using drugs when I was a kid. I started smoking weed when I was like 12 or 13 years old. Then I started taking whites and LSD. Whites were cross tops. It was speed, it was a type of amphetamines. They had different types. But that was the thing, drink. It was, there's a song, weed, whites, and wine, smoke weed, take speed, drink wine, drink, beer, wine, whatever, whiskey. That was the deal, and, I ran into a group of guys growing up, told me, hey, don't ever shoot dope. Like now that you're using drugs, you're partying, whatever, don't ever shoot drugs. Drugs are, you start shooting drugs, you're a dope fiend. Dope fiends can't be trusted. Shooting dope's bad, And I stuck with that my whole life, really. Thank God. And also later on, I met same type of folks told me, look, drugs are for having fun and making money. That's what they're for. And they told me that basically, if you're not having fun and you're not making money, still using drugs, then you're a dope fiend, just like all the rest of these guys. And that also stuck with me, my whole life. So, drugs were for having fun, I didn't really know anyone coming up that used heroin. It's not something that I really got exposed to prior to prison. There was a couple guys in my neighborhood that did, but mostly, we would get together at my pad, especially once my mom divorced my stepdad and I was living at home, pretty much latchkey kid, teenager, prior to going to youth authority. We'd go to my house, smoke weed, drink some beer. Occasionally we'd drink a little wine, and we'd take whites, and we'd take LSD. The LSD came a little later, that was a deal. And we'd listen to music, smoke weed, ride our bicycles around town, go skateboarding, it was fun. It was all fun and games, And then I remember one time I went to juvenile hall and I got out and I spent the night at my friend's house. He had some LSD, and that took me on a few month run of taking LSD every day for, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. And, the LSD was quite an experience. It's something I didn't really enjoy. I did, but I didn't, I had a couple bad trips along with, some good trips. So LSD is a pretty powerful drug, they had angel dust back then, which is PCP, but it wasn't really strong. And guys would lace joints with PCP, with the angel dust with weed, put it in a bong and hit it. I seen guys flip out on it, and it really had a negative effect on me. I didn't smoke it all that much. But, drugs are for having fun. And like the speed, was a whole different deal. Speed, you know, to me, I took whites and stuff, but after I got out of youth authority, um, the second time, that's when I kind of got introduced to crank, and crank was it was a snorting thing. A lot of guys were shooting it. Um, I lived with my friend and his mom. She was a biker chick, and pretty much the whole time I was out for about a year before I got my 15 life term. And that's when I got into really riding. I went from like skateboarding and surfing and bicycling and dirt biking, to a Harley Davidson thing. And the criminal behavior kind of stepped up. But, it was speed, man. It was crank. And crank was manufactured pretty much right there in San Diego. And we had like 3 different connections that all had pretty good speed. And guys are tripping out because out here I was a 17-year-old kid, man. I had the best speed that I had, better speed than they could get crank. And I kind of was like, yeah, I had my chest puffed up. But now I'm carrying a knife, got access to guns, weed and alcohol were there too. But it was mostly like snorting crank, staying up for a week or two, taking pills, reds and Quaaludes to sleep, and then recuperate and then do it some more. Excuse me, still getting over cold. You know, I don't want to say the speed was clean because there's nothing clean about it. But crank was manufactured right there, mostly by biker type guys, guys wanting to make some money. Uh, it wasn't as widespread usage as it is now. Um, Chemicals were readily available to make speed. So, like I said, I don't want to say it was clean, but it wasn't like the poison that they have now. I didn't see a lot of guys that had amphetamine psychosis or any of that kind of stuff. People weren't walking around the streets, you know, flipped out of their minds, standing on street corners begging and so on and so forth. You know, it was a nasty drug. I mean, the longer you stay up on that stuff, the more. I mean, it would destroy your personality a bit. But the thing was, you could stay up for a few days, week, whatever. You could go to sleep, rest, get up, eat, clean up, and you'd be pretty much back to normal. Uh, it didn't destroy you to the point where, you know, you weren't the same person. It didn't create a whole new monster. You would be pretty much back to normal. I knew guys that had jobs, they maintained jobs, and they were, they would buy a few grams of speed from me on Friday, and they'd party all weekend with their friends, and they'd go back to work Monday, and by next payday they were ready to do it again. Uh, Nobody really smoked speed back then. They either snorted it, ate it, or shot it. I really wasn't around a lot of guys that shot it. Um, but that was the deal. I mean, you could live a normal existence and party with crank and smoke weed, drink. Uh, and like I said, never got into the cocaine. I think I tried it once before I went to prison. Didn't really like it. But yeah, I went to prison, and for 1979, I got my case and I went to prison. And while I was in prison, drugs are pretty much readily available. That's where I started seeing like the heroin addicts, and there was crank in there. Guys who were using crank, and that was all the way through the 80s, early 90s. Now what happened was the chemicals that people made speed with changed. They couldn't get the P2P anymore, which is a cleaning agent, I think. It's a solvent. So they started using ephedrine. And I noticed that there was a difference, you know. The ephedrine, you know, it was a different kind of thing. It would affect you, like, instead of staying up for a couple of weeks and then getting kind of weird. The guys were getting kind of weird like real soon. So it was a different kind of crank, you know. It wasn't the same, but you know, still, it didn't really destroy people. I'm sure on the streets it did. I started seeing a lot of guys come into prison with, you know, rotten out teeth, skinny scars where they would pick. But you know, it wasn't super bad yet. You know, in the 80s. Um, and then they made it harder for guys to manufacture speed here in the United States. The penalties became a lot harsher. Um, and then they started, the drug guys down in Mexico realized the market for speed, crank, whatever. And so they started manufacturing it down there. And the biker type guys kind of got out of the manufacturing of speed. The penalty was too high and the reward was too little. So it went back to that thing, like, if you're not having fun, you're not making money, it's time to quit. So the fun was kind of taken out of it, and the money was just really risky as far as the manufacturing went, and it started being manufactured down in Mexico. And for a while, there's only one place in the world, I think, that manufactures ephedrine, and that's India. They make mass quantities of it, and then they distribute it to people who use it to manufacture, you know, cold medications and stuff like that. Um, and I saw a thing on Frontline on PBS where um, they were cops were noticing that the speed that was over here was really pure. And they have photographs of people they arrest. You know, when they first start arresting them, they look kind of normal. Then they get worse and worse and worse. And towards the end, you know, that you can't even identify them as the same person. They're so sucked up and picked out, and you know, and that's when I started noticing in prison, man, that it wasn't a party anymore. I mean, guys are flipping out, guys are locking up, PCing up, thinking people were out to get them. You know, prison gang members were fucking locking up, flipped out of their minds. I remember one guy, well, this is actually earlier, but he'd been up on speed, joined a prison gang, thought it was all cool, and he locked up, but he actually, he stabbed himself, and said he got stabbed, and they checked him out. And he had a T-shirt on, blooding up, but he didn't have a hole in the shirt where his stab wound was. So they realized he stabbed himself. You know, I mean, that's what speed was starting to do to people. Um, started really fucking with people, and soon after that's when I quit. I actually flushed a quarter ounce of speed down the toilet, and it was good speed as far as that goes. It was pretty clean. It was pretty strong, and but the money for me was getting harder and harder to collect. All my friends were in lower level prisons or paroled, and I noticed, hey, here I am on level 4 yard because I was a fuck up, and it was taking me forever to get my points down. All my friends were gone. I was surrounded now by guys that I started noticing. Um, it wasn't a party anymore. Guys were using speed and heroin, and because that's what they did. I mean, that was their lifestyle. Now it was obtaining drugs at all costs was now the thing. It was becoming the thing. That was in the mid 90s. 96, 97, 98. I started seeing this, and so what the cops did is they started testing the speed people were getting busted with, and they realized how pure it was. And they know that it's made out of ephedrine, so they went to India. There's companies that manufacture it, and they put a moratorium on it, like only certain companies could buy it. The cartel guys that are manufacturing speed in Mexico were buying tons of this shit, and so all of a sudden they couldn't get it in the quantities that they wanted. I started seeing guys buy Sudafed and over-the-counter cold medicines, stealing packets of it, little blister packs, popping all the pills out, and then they cook down the pills to get the ephedrine. Then they'd make their speed, a little, I don't know, shake and bake crap, whatever. And I started noticing these guys coming into prison, man, that were strange. They had nervous tics and twitches and their thought processes. It's like they couldn't figure out basic shit. Like I knew not to do certain things because it would lead this way, and like that, it would lead down a path to destruction. To me getting in trouble, me going to the hole, me have to hurt someone. And these guys coming in now that were using, especially the speed on the street, they weren't able to connect the dots. Their cognitive function was diminished. And I remember I was at sick call one day, and this parole officer was there. And I asked her, "So you're a parole officer out in San Diego?" And she says, "Yeah." And I said, "What are you doing here?" She was in the hospital, the infirmary, inside the prison at Donovan. And she said, "Well, I got a guy here in one of these rooms back here." And we started talking about the dope shit, and she said the guy's, he was a dope thing. And anyway, she said, "Look, I asked her, how are things on the street, because I want information. I want to know what's going on out in the world. And that's part of why I can function out here now, is I always tried to stay in touch with, the world out here." And anyway, she said, "Look, back in the day, we'd take a guy that used speed or heroin, you arrest him, you dry him out, you had a normal person, pretty much, She goes, "Now, you get a guy, he's using this speed now, and he's got a amphetamine psychosis going on. You arrest him, you dry him out, and then you have a psychotic inmate. He's a criminal, a psychotic criminal, basically, because the speed and the crack, the coke, guys that smoked it, it was destroying their brains." And I was like, wow, that was a pretty interesting concept. So I would go back to the yard, and that's when guys are going in and out of prison, in and out, parole violations. Guys were staying out a month at best, some of them 6 months, and the heroin guys, once they start shooting heroin, they get addicted, they get hooked. But the speed and the crack dudes, they might have an addiction going, but they also have, like this, I said, this psychosis going on. So they start thinking really crazy shit. Like one dude wanted to rob a Hansom cab, which is a bicycle taxi, the trikes. Had his mask and had it all planned out. Of course, he got busted. And then I would work as a plumber, and I'd work on the reception yard. And I'd talk to some of these guys that come back, and they were on these big conspiracies about who told on them, and just, and they had these weird, elaborate criminal behaviors that they were trying to, enact, and then they get busted and swear up and down that these guys told, and they'd have a big, they'd have this big, elaborate explanation about why they think this guy told, and they had little gang jump up, man, because all the prison gangs are pretty much slammed. So they would be a new gang, like a white power type street gang, that was all of a sudden it went from just having a few guys to having like 40 of them, and these guys would share these conspiracies amongst each other. Some of them, not all of them, but the ones that were twacked out on speed, and and then next thing you know, they're plotting on somebody, and then the guy would pop in to the joint from the street that they were talking about, and they'd smash him, and I was just like, wow, dude, it was a really weird situation, man, and so what it was the drugs were no longer a party. It was a lifestyle. It was a gotta have it. It was guys who, for us, it was a good time. Back in the day, it was like, we're going to have a good time. We're going to party. We're going to make some money. With these guys, it wasn't a good time. It was more like, I can't deal with reality. I can't deal with life without being high. And, period. And so they live their lives pretty much to get high. And they would go out to get loaded at all costs. Guys who are slamming dope, and can you imagine, like, one dude has a syringe and 20, 30 dudes are using it, so they all end up with Hep C and worse. But they didn't give a shit. I tell dudes, man, what the fuck are you doing, dude? You don't have a life sentence. You're going home in months, a year, 2 years, whatever. What the fuck are you going to do when you get out? And they go, the same shit I did when I was out there before. And the same shit they were doing in the pen. So it just became a need to have drugs for these guys. And I was just so glad I quit using and selling dope, man. And part of me was like, I didn't want to be associated with these dudes. So I kind of, as time went on, I started separating myself from the average white dudes on the yard. Not just white dudes, but predominantly, because everybody sticks to their own in California prison system. But I would just kind of do my own thing, and then I'd find, like, a couple older dudes that had life terms, been down as long as I have, and we'd walk the track together, and we'd talk about how fucked up it was, and towards the end about how embarrassing it was to be in prison now, and it was embarrassing, and then I went to lower level pen around 2006, but before I did, I also started noticing that guys would go in debt with other races for drugs, and other races use drugs too. Like when I was slinging dope in Corcoran, I had some Southsiders buying dope from me, and then they'd use some of it and resell some of it, and whatever. But predominantly, white dudes buy drugs in prison, especially speed and heroin. And so these dudes, they would go in debt, knowing they can't pay. Some of them would start off buying dope, paying their debts, because when I used to sell dope in the pen, everyone had cash money, and then they would get it to their folks. But now, as time went on, cash money was a no-no because there was no way to get it out. So guys would do mail-outs off their books, or they'd do it street to street to have their family send money to somebody. There's various ways to send money. And so they would pay their debts, for the first, 3, 4, 5 times that they bought dope from someone. And then they would not pay their debts, and they would run up tabs. And I would be like, man, how do you let someone owe you $1,000 for drugs in prison? Because they sell them enough heroin, for instance, like to get high for a few days, and then they got to buy some more. They got to buy some more. They get them hooked, and then it's like white dudes were looked at as a mark. The guys that buy it, guys that provide the cash for the dope, and whether they were just making a profit or selling enough dope to so they could support their own habits, I don't know. But they were putting these white dudes in debt, insane debts. Some of them owed $2-3 grand, and back in the day, if you owed $50 and you didn't pay within a certain time frame, you were getting stabbed and possibly killed. Guys got killed over owing $20, $30. It was a serious deal. You didn't not pay your debts. You had to pay your debts, you know. Otherwise, you're going to get stabbed, and you might get someone else stabbed. The guys that ran with you were in danger. People paid their debts, period. And no one put somebody in debt that deep. So you had another thing going on too. Now you had all the old gangster type guys that knew how to sell dope. A lot of them were gone. A lot of them were in the shoe. Guys that knew how to sell dope in prison, that were gang members. They were in the shoe forever. And you had these youngsters slinging dope, and in their mind, you know, your money's good, you know, 4 or 5 times. It's going to be good forever, I guess. Or either that, or they just wanted to put guys in debt. And so you got 10, 20 dudes on the yard. They're not paying their debts. And, you know, I'm out of the mix now because I'm not selling dope. I'm not using dope, right? I would just hear rumors. Yeah, Johnny or Mark over there, they owe this, they owe that, you know. And I had a couple younger homeboys like in Donovan that didn't use, and they would tell me everything that was going on, who owed how much money and who they owed. And, you know, that was part of my job, man. Living on a yard and trying to stay out of the mix was I had to know what was going on. So I had some younger homies that would tell me what was going on. And it was insane, man. I couldn't figure it out, you know, how the paradigm changed. You know, I just couldn't figure it out, man. How drugs just became so valuable and so important. You know, that you live your life to the point where you're willing to put yourself in debt. And then guys were just checking in, going to PC left and right. And it became a sensitive needs. They started sensitive needs yards. They had buildings, and then they had yards, then they had whole prisons. And so now guys would come in and start using dope, and the next thing you know, they're off the PC, and I mean, hey, where'd so-and-so go? Oh, he checked in. Really? Why? Oh, he owed like $2,000. And like when I was in Corcoran, you know, this dude, he was living with my neighbor was slinging dope. We were in business together, and his cellie he was getting him high, and then when the dope ran out, his cellie would go out and get in debt, and he couldn't pay. So, you know, my neighbor paid his debt one time, and then, you know, he hits, and they're partying, they're doing this and that, and then the dude went in debt again when the dope dried up. You know, he couldn't wait, you know, 2-3 weeks, whatever, till the guy hit again. So he would go in debt. So my neighbor moved him out to another cell, and we got word, hey, they're going to stab him, you know, because he owes money. And I told this story before, you know, that we're at the guy's door because we're tier tenders, you know, and we got knives all over the building, the yard, because it's a level 4 pin, you know. And we say, hey, dude, you know, they're going to stab you. And he's like, oh, you know. I said, you owe a lot of money, man. They're going to stab you. And he's like, well, you know. And here's my thing. I would never let another race stab a white dude over dope. I'm going to give him a heads up, you know, like, hey. And he goes, you know, who? I go, well, you know who you owe. So, you know, obviously, you know who's going to stab you. And he's like, you know, can you guys help me out? And I looked at my neighbor, you know, and I go, yeah, we'll help you out. And he got a big, like a relief, you know, because my neighbor had paid his debt one time, you know. So he got this big relief look on his face, and I looked at Rick, and I go, we'll give you a knife so you can go out there and stab that dude that you owe money to. You know, I'm going to give that guy that option, you know, to go out and stab the dude that's going to stab him. And his face just dropped like, oh. And he locked up that night, told them where all our knives were in the building. I mean, you know, and he told on my neighbor. He didn't really have a whole lot to say about me because I didn't like the fucking dude to begin with. But that's the kind of shit that was going on. You know, guys would go in debt and check in, and they get spun out, or guys would get spun out to the point where they go out the yard and someone would smash the fuck out of them. They started 2-on-1ing guys because they didn't want to stab people. Well, that's how they would eliminate guys. They call it removal. So a guy'd be all flipped out of his mind on speed. And even if he was paying his debts, but he was just spun out, people would smash him, you know. And I seen guys I knew in the '80s that were good dudes. I seen them in the late '90s, early 2000s. Totally different people. Totally, I try to talk to them about, old times and this and that, and they would just be totally preoccupied with getting drugs. And then I would notice they'd be preoccupied with watching things on the yard, and then boom, they disappear. They go to PC. And so what it was is they would start using, they'd go in debt, and the preoccupation with watching the yard was they were waiting for someone to move on them. That's how prison got with the dope, and it really made me sick to my fucking stomach, man. It just made me withdraw more and more and more into my own, go to work, come home, hit the night yard, watch some laps, work out, go and do my art. I just totally removed myself as much as possible from all that shit, from most of the people in the yard, Um, it was an ugly time, man. And then I went down to lower level prison, like I say, and it was the same shit but worse, because lower level prisons, like level 2 San Quentin, CMC, uh, they weren't excuse me, they weren't stabbing people. They'd beat you up, whatever. So guys were more apt to go in debt, and use, because they just bounce off to another level 2, and worse than what happens, they get beat up, and then they go to SNY. It was ugly, man. I hated it. And lower levels, you had guys stealing from people. One dude, he stole from Harry Hagee. This old man was in his 70s, been down, 50 fucking years. He was an old school gangster, man, and he was an old man. He was actually in his 80s, late 70s, early 80s, and his cellie stole all his coffee, and we were looking for the dude. And fortunately for himself, he made it to the cops and PC'd up before we got our hands on him. I mean, that's what drug use got to in prison, and it just reinforced my decision to not use anymore. And then I went to CMC. I went to Tracy for a short while, but I had valley fever from Soledad. Now Soledad level 2 guys were still get cut, because it was mostly old school lifers with a few youngsters. They call it lifer graveyard. So, and they, guys would get cut there occasionally. But anyways, I went to Tracy for about 3 months. I got there and they said, hey, you're a high risk medical. You got valley fever. They sent me to CMC West. But while I was there, I worked with this guy, man, and he was from South Bay, and he was pretty cool, and he wasn't really a dope fiend, man. And we worked in a carpenter shop, so we'd go to work and eat lunch up in the loft, and he would tell me the shit that was going on in that yard, dude, and it just blew my fucking mind. And you had some dude that I knew was a piece of shit. He was a shot caller, Yeah. Definitely didn't call shots on me or this guy from South Bay, South Bay, LA. I think he was from Torrance, but he didn't let the guy run him. Finally, I told the dude, hey, that guy's a fucking rat, dude. And because he would have meetings with captains and shit in the day room by himself, and that's a no-no. You don't do that shit unless you're telling. But he would walk out with his, chest all puffed out, and he was going to the reception yard, getting their money for tobacco and drugs and burning them, coming over, getting dope, slamming it. Knowingly putting himself in a fucking dangerous position. They ended up beating his face in, broke his jaw, gave the dude brain damage. They beat him so bad. Yeah, that's what I was talking about in my live last night. My friend from IE was a metal militia kid. They put it on that dude. Now, he got a case out of it, unfortunately. But, then I went to CMC West for the, because I was high risk medical, and I was in dorm living, man, and I would see the weirdest shit. These dudes would stay up all night, and, but I seen dudes buy like $50 papers of speed, slam it, and they go to sleep in 3 hours. The next day I tell them, hey, I had a good time last night, huh? I mean, these dudes are using dope that, like back in the day, $50 worth of speed, even in prison, would keep you up for a day or two. These guys, I was like, what the fuck, man? And then I started, got like one time they come around taking collections for this kid because he owed money. We're like, hey, we're taking collection, try to pay his debt. And I told him, hey, look, if you go stab that dude for not paying his debts, I'll pay his whole fucking debt. And they go, man, you're crazy, And then one time, Donovan, they're like, hey, this dude owes money. He owed like $3,000 to another race. And I said, all right. They ran down to me. I said, so, stab him. They're like, man, we don't want to stab him. And so I told them, well, that dude will shoot anything. So hook up an outfit with some fucking battery acid in it. Give him a hot shot. And they're like, man, we don't want to kill him. I said, so what the fuck you coming to me for, I mean, that's how bad it got. Dudes were owing that much money, putting themselves on. So anyways, and guys they weren't stabbing them and they weren't smashing them, So I did my level 2 time but I mean, it was just nonstop. Dudes acting fucking weird, stupid, paranoid, continuously in debt, and then I realized what's happening out here. I see it, in LA and here. The homeless camps, dude, are just Skid Row is horrible. Sacramento's terrible. Um, it's drug use, You go into a camp and you find syringes everywhere. You catch a guy sleeping underneath the freeway overpass, and it's got 200 or 300 needles in the tent that he's sleeping in. It's just drug use, and that's what they live for, And you see all the stolen shit they have. You see them walking around, skinny, terrible, sucked up, just they're living horrible, miserable lives, man. And so what's up with the drugs now is, like I said, back in the day when bikers used to manufacture the speed and everything, you could use it, whatever. I was telling someone, the other day, we've did our dirt, we partied, used drugs, drank, all that shit. And then we decided to stop or cut back on certain shit or just stop certain things. And now we've attained a certain level of existence where we're comfortable. Like the wife and I, we're not rich by any means, but we're comfortable and we're able to work and we're able to do YouTube, art. She's got a job, whatever. We survive and we're fortunate. But now the people who use drugs now, they're they can't get the chemicals they want. Someone told me there's about 3 grams of speed inside an ounce of speed when you buy it. It's full of crap, and it's also full of fentanyl. So is the cocaine. So is the Norcos that they press down there. They have fentanyl in them. One of our subs said that his wife's brother, I believe, died from Norco pills that were pressed down in Mexico and had fentanyl in them. It killed them. But they put just enough fentanyl in that speed. You'd think, well, I'm using speed and I'm getting wired up, so I don't, how's there fentanyl in there? Well, they put just a little bit in there, just a little bit in there. And every time they use it, then they're hooked. The fentanyl has them hooked on it. It's not that they're not hooked on speed. They don't know it. They're hooked on fentanyl. And them dudes down there and making that shit don't care. It's their business. They're just a customer providing money for their business. That's how they look at it. So if they get you hooked, you're just the best customer they ever had because you're never going to stop using. And the speed it's got so much garbage in it. They're shooting it, smoking it, and they're walking around totally out of their minds. They go into amphetamine psychosis like within a couple of days at best. And it gets to the point where they don't even realize who they are. And I've dealt with quite a few of them, man. And they get sucked up, skinny. They look like Skeletor. Their face gets sucked in. And of course, they leave a trail of destruction everywhere they go. Piles of needles, stolen stuff that they steal. And I think maybe they tear things apart to try and figure them out. I don't know, but we find a lot of appliances that are torn apart. It's just a nightmare. And if you've seen homeless camps, you know what I'm talking about. And so these guys who are using drugs now, I think a lot of them, most of them, will never survive the way we did. People who used drugs in the 70s and 80s, these people now will never survive the way we did and go on to lead a semi-normal, comfortable life, because their addiction and their psychosis has pretty much destroyed any chances of that. Some of them, if they can clean up and then realize that they have this mental problem and they get some medication and some help, maybe they can, attain a certain level of existence that's okay. But the way I see it, most of them will never attain a decent standard of living ever. They're not going to recover. They're not going to survive. The drugs have a grip on them, and the guys that make the drugs down there in Mexico or south of the border, they don't give a shit, and they've perfected a way to basically sell garbage because somebody told me a chemist friend of theirs bought an ounce of speed and cleaned it out, however they do it, chemistry wise, came up with 3 grams of speed out of an ounce. So back in the day, if you would have sold someone an ounce of speed like that, they'd probably come back and shoot you. But now these guys are so hooked on the fentanyl, and they're feeding their psychosis that they don't give a shit, man. And there's so much crap in the dope, especially the speed and the cocaine, crack. That's a whole nother deal. But there's so much garbage in there that's destroying their brains, and it's a really, really sad thing to see. So I'm telling you, that's where the drug use is at now, and it's made me so glad that I made the decision to quit fucking with it when I did. And if you're young and you see that dope life as a gangster thing to make money and have a good time, it's not what it is. The money is very risky, and you have to deal with some very dangerous people. Have at it if you want, but chances are, you're going to end up in jail or dead. Because unless you're extremely smart, I've said this about other things. There's guys involved with that game that have been involved with that game for decades, some of them, and they're going to outgame you, and they're going to outmove you, and you're going to come out on the losing end. At best, you're going to make a few bucks for a year or two, never enough to really balance out the amount of time you're going to do in prison when you get caught, and you will get caught. And there's guys out there, when they get heat on themselves, they will tell on you. They'll sell you down the river in order to free themselves so they can continue selling dope and making money and doing all the things that go with it. So don't think you're going to be a young dude, jump in the dope game, make a bunch of money, and have a bunch of shit and have a good time, because it's not what it's about anymore. And if you think you're going to use dope, especially if you haven't yet, and somebody comes up, like you think they're your friend, and they're going to offer you, let's party, let's use this, anyone that approaches you with that, with drugs like that nowadays, they're not your friend. They're looking for a co-victim. You know, they're victims of the drug trade and the illegal drug trade, and they're gonna suck you into that. They want a co-victim. You know, they want someone that can go out and steal with them and help provide for their drug habit. And then maybe they'll rat on you when the heat comes down on them for whatever, and you'll go to prison. So don't think you're going to have a good time. Don't think it's going to be easy. Don't think you're going to make a ton of money, because it's not that kind of party anymore. They're guys that if you cut into their action, they'll straight shoot you or they'll rat on you. That's an old game that gangsters on the East Coast used to do. You could rat. They could rat on anybody except their own people. And there's people out here now that will rat on anybody and everybody, and including you. And they'll, if you want a party, they're going to sell you the biggest piece of crap they can sell you for the most amount of money to pad their pockets. And you know, it's a vicious game, and it's not fun, and it leads to jails, institutions, and death, as they say. And all I can tell you is don't start. And if you've already started and you haven't reached that state of no return on the psychosis with the speed or your addiction, there's help out there, man. You know, there are places that will help you kick. There are places you can go for rehab. There's meetings. There's people, I'm sure, in these programs that will sit with you to help you get clean. There's people that'll feed you. You might find some housing and sober living. There's a lot of ways out of it. You know, don't think you're stuck. And if you know anyone who's reached that point of no return as far as that psychosis, please try to get them some help, because you know, I've seen it, man. It's an ugly deal. So getting clean, best thing I ever did, best thing you could ever do. Take care of your lives, man. You only live once, as far as we know, on this earth. Where we go after this, who knows? But right now, we only get one shot at this. So make the most of it and do it hard. Thank you.